First of all, welcome to another installment of Webinars for Busy Lawyers, Why AI Innovation Doesn't Work and How Solo and Small Law Firms Will Succeed, presented by Ryan Groff, whom I will introduce in a moment. First, my name is Amy Levine, Director of Programs and Volunteers at Lawyers Concern for Lawyers, and I will be your host for today. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to remind you of the services LCL offers to support the well-being of the Massachusetts legal community. These include one-on-one consultations with licensed clinicians for mental health and substance use concerns, peer support groups, educational programs, and consultations with our law practice advisor on firm management and professionalism. Our services are confidential and free. We love and encourage questions, which Ryan will answer at the end of this presentation, so please use the chat feature for those questions. And now I'd like to introduce Ryan. Ryan is the Director of Learning at DeepJudge. He recently led client advising teams and served in senior consulting roles at Thomson Reuters. He led customer education at Casetext, where he was part of the team that launched the AI legal assistant CoCounsel. And he previously led product advocacy for Leap legal software. He's a member of the Massachusetts Bar and presents at various venues across the US and around the world. He is a lecturer on law at New England Law in Boston, where he developed the school's first course on law with innovation and technology, which he still teaches. Ryan holds graduate degrees with honors in law and theology. Welcome, Ryan, and we can get started. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Amy, and thanks for each of you. Really appreciate your time as one lawyer to other lawyers in the Commonwealth. I know you're all busy, so it's really an honor to have your time today. I'll jump right in, but look forward to our discussion during the second half of our time today. I framed our session today around what doesn't work and how certain legal contexts maybe can benefit in different ways. I did this because I think the feeling of overwhelm is somewhat palpable. You can almost cut through it at times, maybe all the times. And also because I do think smaller teams, they may have some great opportunities. So I wanted to frame today's talk around those two ideas. But this situation, maybe especially the feeling of overwhelm, isn't unexpected. I think hold on one second here. Not completely unexpected. And what I mean by that is about a decade ago, this past January, Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, he made an observation. And just for context, the World Economic Forum, or WEC, it hosts the well-known annual event in Davos, Switzerland. So in 2016, Schwab explained that we had entered what he called the fourth industrial revolution. And the fourth is defined by what he calls velocity, scope, and impact. And here's what he said about how that's going to affect us. The speed of current breakthroughs has no historical precedent. When compared with previous industrial revolutions, the fourth is evolving at an exponential rather than linear pace. So I can't find a better way to describe the experience that at least I'm having, maybe you're having, of the advancement of today's, specifically AI technologies, but potentially other things as well. And really why innovation feels somewhat broken and somewhat unworkable. So that's why we're here today, because of that prophecy. I would say it's a prophecy that has come true. Before getting too far along, like Amy said, my name's Ryan. I'm a lecturer on law at New England Law Boston, so right here in the local Boston area, Massachusetts. I am director of learning at a company based in Zurich, Switzerland called DeepJudge. If any of that's interesting, I'm happy to say a bit maybe during our discussion time, but no part of my presentation really has to do with that particular work. But I'm also a lawyer here in the Commonwealth and a former paralegal. And I think that really shapes the way I look at legal services. Maybe we'll say more about that as well. But Amy, thank you for the kind introduction. Happy to answer more questions about me if that's of interest at to anyone. Our agenda today, hopefully keeping it pretty simple. We're going to talk about what it means to innovate. We're going to think about what today's AI really is and how it works and what it does. We're going to look at why innovation doesn't work. and really some ideas for how solo and small firms will succeed. And then hopefully, again, ending our time today with 20 or 30 minutes of discussion. So jumping right in, what does it mean to innovate? I'm going to take this from a definitional standpoint and look at some of the ways that the literature has approached innovation in the past 100 years or so. So first up, thinking with Joseph Schumpeter, and forgive me if you know his work better and I'm pronouncing that name wrong, but for him, innovation is distinct. It's a distinct displacing phenomena. It's not mere improvement over time. So you can sort of think of the regular sort of changing of things, that slow improvement that you do on a regular basis. That's not what he has in mind. And his word for development is actually kind of similar to how we use innovation today. He was writing at the early part of the 20th century. But development in our sense, in the sense that he's advancing in his work, is a distinct phenomenon, entirely foreign into what may be observed in the circular flow or in the tendency towards equilibrium, right? That sort of general experience we have of improving over time. It's spontaneous and discontinuous. It's change. And at the end, he says it displaces the equilibrium state previously existing. So when we think of innovation, we think of not mere slow improvement over time that we're always a part of, but something almost jarring, almost displacing. Continuous adjustment in small steps. There's certainly change, possibly growth, but neither a new phenomenon nor development in our sense. So again, that small growth over time, not really what we're talking about. Those small efficiency gains. Innovation, how we're thinking about it, and I like to adopt his idea here. It's not just mere improvement over time. And he uses the example, the last bullet there. He says, it's sort of a dare. He says, I challenge you to add successively as many male coaches as you please. You will never get to a railway. And here's that idea of new combinations have to displace something. They have to do something completely new. And so in our diagram here, we're sort of looking, you just add more male coaches, you get a congested roadway. You don't get the experience and the efficiency of a railway. So let's take that definition further. It's new combinations, but also by entrepreneurs. So what does Schumpeter mean when he says that? So innovation is carried into practice. It's not mere invention. So you can think of sort of AI labs or maybe any sort of inventor over the past few millennia. Making an invention is not what he has in mind here. He has the idea of carrying it into practice with economic relevance. Once you do that, he makes the point in the second bullet that quoted Mark. They have carried out new combinations. They are entrepreneurs. And the effect of that is they get entrepreneurial profit. So you can think of all the new combinations that you put together to get a railway network. That's the new thing. A lot of the things that were needed for the rail network, they already existed. You had steam power coming together. You had metallurgy that allowed you to create the tracks. There were some new things, right? Capital Railroad Corporation bonds. Some of the way investment happened, that was kind of novel. The first real examples of that were when they were trying to raise the capital for railroads. So there was a few little seasonings of new things that kind of came in. But in many ways, the railway was a combination of things taken into practice, carried into practice, and that became innovation. So again, this idea that we're not just sort of creating new things in a purist in a lab and sort of being enamored by the new thing and what it can do, but we're actually carrying it into practice. We're doing something with it. And finally, I want to also emphasize that we're putting things together in maybe new, novel ways. We're being entrepreneurial about it, carrying it into practice, but we're also doing it today. And when we do it in context, sometimes we experience two different kinds of innovation. We can experience disruptive innovation, or what we might call sustaining innovation. And here I'm borrowing from Christensen. Clayton Christensen, the longtime professor at Harvard Business School. And so just two examples here. So disruption might look like this. Maybe an AI native firm starts to provide faster and cheaper quality legal services to maybe pockets of the legal market. And established firms, because they use different metrics, they don't really notice, or they kind of just take note and it doesn't really track with them. They're still doing fine. They're making money. So they carry on as usual. But what happens is maybe the AI native law firm eventually captures more and more of the legal market share. And eventually the established firms can't compete, or they even fail. So that's a rubric, what Clayton would mean by a disruption. And maybe the ultimate sort of fatal result there. But you can also you don't have to have always disruptive innovation. You can have sustaining innovation. You can have innovation that maybe the established firms actually take note and start to apply this new tool, this new capability in ways themselves to actually meet their clients' needs. Maybe those clients have been asking for stuff for years, fixed fees, for example, so they can know what they're paying ahead of time. And maybe they start to wrap those sorts of things together, and they actually take advantage of that. And as they grow and improve over time, they use it to sustain their own trajectory. And so in that situation, we have an improvement, we have a remaining. So innovation, when it's happening today, it doesn't have to always be disruptive. It can be what Christensen calls sustaining. So thinking about all of this, applying it to what it might look like for legal professionals, let's just think of a few examples. So our first slide, we looked at innovation is distinct, it's displacing, it's not mere improvement over time. So you could think of legal professionals, maybe in firms or in-house teams, they develop a new matter type. It puts together maybe a few tools or a few work process differently. It displaces the status quo of how things were done. It's an improvement, sort of a fundamental change. It displaces. Or if we think of the vendor situation, this is my full-time job. I'm a lawyer that works at a legal tech vendor. Maybe we actually do create a novel technology, right? It completely displaces other technologies. And there's some examples of those on screen there. But some non-examples of this kind of innovation, you might, sort of legal professionals convene their innovation committees, they run pilots, they run process improvement workshops, all good things, right? All good things in the general course of that slow march towards better efficiency, really good to be part of, but not really what we mean by innovation. Or maybe vendors, they release sort of regular expected software updates to keep up with security patches, for example, or just to make the technology more relevant to today's technology expectations. All good things, but not really what we mean by innovation. The second thing we looked at, applying it, maybe innovation is carried out into practice. It's not mere invention. So in this situation, maybe legal professionals, they combine technology in a new way. They create a novel workflow that captures new business, right? They weren't able to really serve that kind of client before because it just didn't make economic sense, right? They couldn't do good things like pay their employees, keep the lights on. It wasn't possible to offer that kind of legal services. But now they're figuring out a way to do so. So that's kind of exciting. Vendors, maybe they're partnering with a legal professional, maybe like a firm or an in-house team, and they're commercializing a sort of technology plus legal know-how combined service or product, right? That's not just invention. We're actually carrying that into the market in a new way. What doesn't really count as carrying into practice, legal professionals just buying a new app, right? You're not really implementing anything if you just buy it and let it sit on the shelf, right? The shelfware develops for that reason, and there's some reasons for that. We'll look at that in a second. But also vendors creating a new app. You don't get credit for innovation just because you invented something and it sort of sits there, right? It's not carried into practice. And so that's maybe what we can think about in our situation for that layer. But then also innovation, remember, it can be disruptive or sustaining. So we might ask ourselves questions like, do we really know thyself? Do we know our market? Do we question our current metrics? Are they measuring the right things? Can we do better based on making tweaks? So those are good questions to keep in mind as we think of disruptive. Will these sort of new things hit us as a disruption or as us being able to sustain our own improvement over time and remain? So that's thinking about innovation. So what is innovation and how we think about it? That's how I'm framing it. There's probably many ways to frame it, but that's kind of how I'm thinking about it for today's purposes. So also wanted to take a second to just think about what AI is and does. So I'm going to do a then and now routine. So then reach back into your memories to 2022, very late 2022 when ChatGPT came out, very long time ago in AI terms. So we had a large language model when ChatGPT first launched. It was 3.5. They quickly the following spring of 2023 launched GPT-4, and that's what sort of made all the interest sort of develop. But GPT 3.5 was what they launched ChatGPT with in late 2022, and at the time, the model was much more limited than today's models. So it really had the ability only to work with text. And it worked with text. And so the tool that we had to interact with 2022 ChatGPT running the GPT 3.5 model, the tool we had was a chat interface. And that's really all it did. You could type prompts like, write me a poem about the practice of law, and then you could follow up with a, great, let me see that in Icelandic. And those would be fun things we did with 2022 ChatGPT. And honestly, I did that exact routine. That is exactly how I started thousands of trainings in the early days. But this whole experience, it was packaged up as an app, and we called it ChatGPT. So that's what we experienced then. So fast forward to now, 2026, we still have a large language model. That large language model is now GPT 5.6. That model is much more capable. And so it has the ability to work with many more kinds of information and do many more things. And so as a result, we can actually hook it up to different tools and have it do many other things. We can open up side canvases and actually draft documents live and type into that and have it change things. We can still chat. We can search the web. We can do sort of thinking and research modes where it goes into different kinds of content generation. We can do images. We can even create study routines. So because this model's capabilities are more, we can actually connect different tools to it, but we still want to keep a distinction. The tools, those side programs, those side apparatuses, those are different than the model itself. So when GPT 5.6 is searching, it's using a capability, it's using a tool to search the internet. It itself doesn't search, but it reaches for a tool to do so. And all of this is what we mean by ChatGPT in 2026. So even the free version, you log in, you might get throttled, right? You might ask two things and then be asked to upgrade your plan. But this is generally what we mean by interacting with ChatGPT in 2026. But we also need to magnify that by all the different apps. So it's not just ChatGPT anymore. ChatGPT definitely sort of had our attention because it sort of launched first. It gave the first public, commercially available, even free, right, for those first few months experience. We hadn't experienced these things before. AI labs were really the only places sort of dabbling with these large language model chatbots. But now it's public. So very quickly after that, Google launched Bard, which is now Gemini, Anthropic's Claude, Perplexity, Copilot, Grok, right? All of those are sort of what we call big AI or public, sort of general use artificial intelligence. But then we also had a smattering of applications of this technology in legal technology. So arguably, CoCounsel launched right around the same time as GPT-4 from OpenAI. You had Harvey, you had Legora, LawY, Lexis Plus AI, Iris, right? Lots of other apps. And there's no way I can do justice to the full mapping here. But if you did want a full map of all the AI tools, actually, Legal Tech Hub is a great resource. They have a map that they publish a few times a year that updates and categorizes into different kinds of legal technology, all of the AI-enabled tools that are currently available and built specifically for legal professionals. So check them out. Again, that's Legal Tech Hub, a great resource for you. But we looked at sort of what it is. Now just to take a moment or two, what does it do? There's a lot of text here. So these slides will definitely be available afterwards, but I'm going to quickly kind of just work through here. What does it do? Well, generative artificial intelligence is a pattern recognizing technology. It understands and generates meaning. So how that's distinct from what we were used to before. So that first bullet, it says it can understand and generate meaning. So what words point to in their intent? It can actually, if you think of a toddler and you say, look at the camera, sometimes they'll look at your finger. Right? This technology actually knows how to understand what you mean and sort of follow your line of sight and look at what you mean. It has the ability to understand what you're saying, that meaning. It's not just the thatness of what's said. And I know that's a weird term, but the thatness, by thatness, I mean, think of when you used search in Lexis or Westlaw or Google, maybe 5 or 10 years ago. You did a string of characters, and those were your keyword searches, or you did a string of sort of maybe a phrase of words, maybe in quotes or not, that was sort of meant to capture a short semantic snippet. But that's how you search. You search because the thing literally typed was what was going and being looked for, rather than the search being able to understand the overall description of what's happening. So what we mean by that is it can take instruction. So it can go, for example, I can give it the instruction, go find defendants' motions to dismiss from 2016 to 26, filed in the Southern District of New York, alleging fair use. And it can actually understand what I mean. And then it can actually go do a search if it's using that search tool, maybe to search if maybe I have a legal tech tool that searches all my internal documents, or maybe I'm using a tool that searches the internet. It can actually understand that. And then it can come back at the end and say, I found motions for the last 10 years concerning fair use, but none of them are from a defendant, and nor are they filed in the Southern District of New York. So it has the ability to understand my direction, what I wanted to get from it, not just the individual words. So I hope that helps to frame what it's capable of doing, but also I want to focus on what it can't do. So it's pattern recognition. It's not thinking. So we do a lot of abstract thought when we think as humans. Just recognizing patterns is a limitation. So if you can think of that, the first signs of this technology, we actually didn't even know about it, but it was the early versions of this technology. Remember when we were typing in email and a little gray text would appear asking us if that's what we meant to complete the rest of our sentence in Outlook and Gmail? That was the first example of this technology, but because it was recognizing a pattern, and from all that it knew about how humans write emails, it was saying, "Hey, we generally think these are your next 3 words. If you tap enter or tab, we'll just go ahead and put them there." But these technologies, more sophisticated, but they still work on that same principle. It's recognizing patterns. They are limited by context window. So that's the amount of information that it can handle at a given time, meaning it can run out of thinking runway. Um, and so there's ways these tools try to use information well, but eventually, if you're having too long of a chat, it'll kind of forget what you first said, and you'll need to remind it. So limited context window, whereas your context window, you can probably remember things from grade school, right? Your context window is quite large, and your brain has the ability to reach back for that information in a way that's still unmatched by today's technology tools. It's also capable. It's capable, but it needs humans to provide context and steps. And what we mean here is a good prompt. And I just want to note here, prompting shouldn't be thought of as some extraterrestrial crazy new thing. It really, inexperienced humans always needed good prompts too. So if you're good at overseeing summer associates or interns, people who are highly capable but have no idea what they're doing yet, right? If you're good at giving them instructions, you should be a good prompter, because that's really what a similar experience as working with today's AI tools. So what's the effect of all this? Just very quickly, AI can use incorrect inputs. So if you upload 5 documents, it might use the wrong document to answer your question, right? It can make that kind of mistake, but it can also make this mistake. It can use the correct input incorrectly. So it might go to the right document, but it'll combine the ideas in that document incorrectly. And so that gets really confusing really quickly. So I want to settle here in this table for a second here, because if we ask the question, why do I get different outputs with the same inputs, right? That's really annoying. But I would press you to think that that's probably true sometimes when you're working with other humans too, right? And there's a few different ways that those different responses can exist. They can be different responses that are still correct. They didn't use the exact same wording, but they got the idea, right? Sort of like the idea here on the screen. You can ask similarly trained or similarly experienced legal professionals the same question, and their wording will never be exactly the same unless they're rotely citing some sort of rule. But it's very likely that with the same experience, the same training, they can all answer correctly. And so here's a few different ways that working with AI, we might have that same experience. So maybe in the table, in the first example, it focused on the correct text input a second time. Maybe you asked the same question of the same document a second time. Will the wording change? Yes. Will the answer substance be the same? Very likely it'll be the same. But let's take the second row. Maybe when you asked that same question, it focused on different but still relevant text, right? It focused, and will the wording change? Yes. Will the answer still be the substance be the same? Very likely, yes, right? It might have gotten the information from a different part of the document, maybe even unexpected to you, but it still got the answer right. So the third option, it focused on incorrect text, right? So then it made a mistake. It didn't go after what you were looking for. Will the answer substance still be the same? Not likely, but it could be, right? Just for the wrong reason, right? It could still give you the right answer, but it just didn't rely on the right thing. And maybe one of the examples of doing that is that last option. It might ignore your input altogether and just answer from its pre-training. And so will the wording be different, right? Will the substance be the same? It's not likely it'll be the same, but it could be, right? It could have the right answer for the wrong reason. And so here there's a short note at the bottom of this slide about pre-training. Pre-training is literally the process of how these large language models understand how to work with language at all. And sometimes they reach for that generic training as a way to substantively answer your questions. And there's a link there in the slides that you can work with. So what's the remedy to this, right? This is very frustrating, right? Again, I just want to emphasize, it's not a new frustration. We've always had the frustration of asking maybe people to do similar things and they come back with maybe an incorrect answer this time, but last time they were correct, right? There's many reasons why we have this experience. But when we're working with AI, one remedy is to provide good prompts, right? And maybe concretize or standardize your prompts. If you notice that a certain prompt works really well, certain tools have the ability to save that to a library, to create a skill that does that same routine over and over again, or a workflow. So provide good prompts and then maybe save those prompts. That might be the first remedy. Second remedy, use a deterministic, maybe permission-aware search experience to feed the right info to AI first. So instead of having an AI tool just sort of reason over 500 documents, you might use search first, or an agent that's capable of searching. And by searching, I mean it can write a query. It can use a metadata filter to make sure that it uses a taxonomy or an author or a date field in the metadata of the file to limit the focus to only those pieces of information that have that metadata. So a search layer can often be a really great way to cut down on inaccuracy to get you the right information, but it can also be a great way to save tokens, right? You don't have to pay the LLM to process information when you're simply using run-of-the-mill search technology that we've had for many decades. And then remedy 3, you would oversee the AI assistants the same way you oversee human assistants, right? You're going to check the citations. You've always done that with humans, so you would not stop doing that with AI. And checking those citations allows you to pick up on this table, those scenarios where the AI answers maybe similarly, but for the wrong reason. So just a quick review of good prompting. This is not a prompting course, but just a quick example here. So in your scenario, you provided a Gen AI tool with 5 documents you received during a client intake meeting. Here's a bad way to do it. Look through these documents and tell me if there's anything important. Okay, I'm not going to read you those 2 X's, but essentially you can sort of maybe put together, you're delegating a lot of details to that assistant. And honestly, if this kind of prompt were given to a newly hired human, they would also fail, right? They would not know what they're doing. So, and maybe that's the nth degree. Maybe we're all able to sort of pick up on the fact that this is bad. But a good prompt would do some of the things that bottom section does. You can see all the context I'm giving it. I'm telling it what the documents are. I'm telling it why I want it to read it. I'm telling it what the outcome should be and exactly what to do with that extracted information. So that's just a quick note on prompting, because it's definitely relevant here. So why AI innovation doesn't work? So just the first thing, the speed of current breakthroughs really has no historical precedent. And here I am borrowing exactly word for word from Klaus Schwab, that prediction that we saw early on. It really feels impossible to do our actual jobs, our legal jobs, and to also keep abreast of AI changes. And that's language taken right from ABA Rule 1.1, Comment 8, which I believe Massachusetts carries over to its own rules verbatim. But really, this idea that I'm supposed to keep track of stuff, you can sort of see on this table. This is how AI models have been improving over time. You can see that sort of watershed moment in 2021, 2022, when things just took off, with the white being brand new models. So not only are we improving the existing ones, but we're actually coming out with new models that have new capabilities. But you can see that just sort of takes off. So the effect of this is that you can have, and this is from my experience, you can have too much technology, and that can be the result of preferences over priorities, meaning people just sort of adopt things because they prefer a certain tool, even though they have 3 tools that already do drastically the same things, right? And this situation kind of leads to a few things. So innovation theater, so buying stuff to be seen as buying stuff, sometimes that takes over, not just in law, but in other businesses too, right? You want to have the technology so you can attract new talent. There might even be good reasons to have it, right? It aligns with your overall business objectives, and again, your talent acquisition strategy, for example. But innovation theater can be a real roadblock, especially for a small team, right? You have to do things for purposes, not just appearances. Pilot purgatory also then maybe sets in. You're just endlessly testing. But purgatory in this sense is the sort of suffering without improvement, right? This, if you think of the religious notions of purgatory, it's actually for a purpose. But endless pilot testing, you sort of just get stuck testing things, and it can feel really, really onerous. In this scenario, you also have jobs like legal engineer and jobs like innovation lawyer that start to crop up, especially at larger firms. But really, if you read the fine print, these jobs are meant to own increased adoption, right? They have too many tools, and so they're hiring people to really be in charge of making sure everybody adopts all the tools, rather than these roles being focused on workflow mapping, process improvement through holistic, maybe client care or change management, right? That's the kind of stuff maybe somebody who's a legal engineer or an innovation lawyer, that's the rich stuff they should be focused on. But they're simply in charge. They're sort of wrapped in at the end once a whole pile of stuff has been purchased, and they're just sort of made to clean up the mess. And that's a hard place to operate from. It's really hard. I've also seen, or I think one of the effects can be the use case carousel. And this is something I've seen quite regularly. We have sort of a vendor comes in with their technology, and they have sort of some generic use cases about how they believe the technology should be used. And oftentimes these vendors have very, very talented people on staff, right? People with legal training, people who are licensed to practice, all that stuff. But those are worse. Those generic use cases are always worse. And I say that as somebody who's at one of those vendors. They're always worse than the customers in real life uses. But sometimes customers, and sometimes for good reason, they're sort of precious, right, about sharing their use cases. So that makes it kind of harder to fully imagine the best rollouts. So that can decrease adoption. And then we get to the point where we're like, hey, we need to rethink, we need to improve these use cases. And then we're sort of back. We're sort of stuck in this use case carousel. So Some ways to get out of this mode. I would say just buy or build against a problem. So by practical applications, you should be buying practical applications or solutions, not technologies. And I forgive me, the word buy there, the second word buy should have a U in it. But you're going to buy practical applications or solutions, not just technologies, right? Thinking back to that innovation, what is innovation? You're going to carry it into practice. So you want to buy something that's actually solving a problem. How to get out of maybe pilot purgatory? If you've defined your solution and then you start small and test possible solutions against that definition, again, you can sort of see how that relates to the first one. You're not just buying tech, you're not just buying inventions, you're buying things that can meaningfully improve, meaningfully achieve that solution that you needed because you wrote out exactly what that meant for your team. You defined it ahead of time, and now you can test new technologies against that. Jobs like legal engineer, if you're stuck with these sort of situations where you have people brought in at the end and they really don't know how to just clean up the mess that was made at a different part in the organization, build these roles into the pre-procurement process so that they can influence the solution making moment from the outset, not just post-purchase, right? Help them define what that solution is from the front end so they're not just left with 10 or 15 solutions that all do drastically the same thing. And maybe, they're then stuck with wandering focus, right? Not just for their time, but also the teams. And the last case, how to avoid the use case carousel. It kind of relates to some of the other ideas. A well-defined solution includes practical applications. You can't have a well-defined solution, something that you're trying to go find tech to solve, if you don't have real-life practical applications of that potential solution. So you can't really have a meaningful look to solve a problem unless you've developed an understanding of the real world scenarios where that problem happens, aka a use case. So it's part and parcel to this idea of coming up with problems that have hypothetical solutions and testing against that. You have to have that real world scenario in mind from the front end, meaning you shouldn't get through a sales cycle and you have not talked about your use cases yet, right? Because you don't purchase stuff that doesn't solve your problem. So here's where I think how solo and small firms can succeed. The setting here, arguably, I'm making the argument that it's easier to change when you're closer to the work. And I've experienced this at 2 companies, arguably maybe 3 companies so far, that are running in startup mode. They're nimbler, they're smaller teams, under 100 people, right? And we can simply work faster, right? We can make decisions at the speed of maybe a few hours or a day rather than weeks or months. And so some implications here, if that's true. And here I'm borrowing from some other literature. The sources are all at the bottom. Again, you can look through this. I'll send out the deck. But because these teams have a setting of being hands-on, and so a story, thinking about the sort of Toyota way of how Japanese companies sort of put together these situations. There was a situation where a team was trying to develop a bread making machine and they couldn't do it. So what eventually solved it was they took a bunch of engineers, people who were trying to build this bread making machine, and they did an apprenticeship with a master baker. And they watched the master baker work. And they noticed that the baker had a small twisting motion at one part of the dough kneading process. And so they were able to, because they sat in the context, they were able to take this sort of tacit knowledge and socialize it into the actual thing itself. And so you can think of the people at your firm, and maybe it's you at times too, who's doing the hands-on work, who has a close touching understanding of exactly what's happening. Those people, reach for them. And some, again, you're on a small team, you have a few paralegals, maybe an associate or two, or a partner or a fellow shareholder. These teams can be really good because they all have their hands-on things. And I think that creates a moment where you can see different possibilities. You also have proximity. So one of the other ideas is that if you're closer to the problem as a lead user, right, you're somebody that can anticipate the benefit of obtaining a solution. Because if you buy that, you can see it changes your work-life balance because you don't have to do this manual process that takes forever, right? You can actually apply it some other way. So being at the leading edge, being in proximity to the work allows you to be a lead user and allows you to benefit more quickly. And because you're going to benefit, you have a stake in improving. There's also empowerment. So organizations have to give people empowerment. Sometimes people closest to the work, again, think of your paralegals, your legal assistants, maybe your associates. Um, Toyota had this idea of innovating at the lowest possible organizational level when something had to change. And I love that vision because I do think paralegals and legal assistants sometimes have the best vantage on what costs more, what wastes time. And if we listen to them, they can actually be some of the most powerful voices for change. And then contributions, right? People, if you can improve your own job, you're more willing to contribute. And I think there's some value there as well. And so small teams can share each of these dynamics, I think, um, with each other and often experience maybe multiple of them rather than just one or another. Whereas in larger organizations, you sort of have the people making decisions are different than the people who have hands-on experience or maybe not empowered at the lowest level of the organization to make change. And that contribution is diffused or it's aggregated. So I think that's one, the setting is unique. But smaller isn't easier. I just want to be clear about that. You're often wearing more hats, so intention is very important. And so you can sort of recognize this short cycle that I was sort of thinking of. You have your time to do work, and then you need time to recognize and define problems. You need time to test and choose those solutions, and then time to implement and measure that change. And then it all starts over again. And it's probably not in a nice linear way. It's probably happening in multiple different dimensions on different fronts, right? And so this is not easy. And there's kind of two ways you can think about this, and maybe not only one or the other, but these are some benefits or levers you might reach for. So those two big squares, one way that you might do this is you might have innovation hours, right? If you credit or compensate your employees by billable hour requirements, maybe some of those hours every year, maybe a few tens or hundreds of the hours can actually be, if you're doing innovation type work, that can count towards your hourlies. So a positive here is it keeps work and innovation paired, right? Keeps that innovation moment right at the worker level. But a negative might be that those individuals then have to balance their time, right? And so if you already trust them to balance their time to get their billables in, so maybe there's even logic there. Well, you already trust them in that way, so maybe that's not a negative. So that's one way of thinking about it. You can do innovation hours, give them credit, right, for innovating. The other thing is dedicated innovators, right? So maybe you hire people or you make as part of somebody's job thinking about applying new technology or testing new things. And so maybe in that situation, the positive is that person has more time to play, right? Because it's a dedicated part of their position, or maybe half their position, or a fourth their position, or a few people's, right? But you can sort of, if you dedicate time for that, that might have some benefits because they have more time then. But they might be less connected to the actual work, right? If they're not doing the work, but they have sort of the role of innovating, and maybe they're separate from the actual writing of the briefs, for example, maybe there's some disconnect there. Then you have to develop ways of communicating. And there's other noise that happens too. You know, the decision makers or the DMs are all part of it. Maybe other technologies that are always coming in. You have different practice areas that maybe have different needs, and the business itself maybe requires things. So there's definitely noise to manage. But I think I'm putting all this on screen just as a rubric for how you might think through. So just a few things of what I've seen as we sort of think about entering our discussion. So at small firms, I've seen them empower lead users in a really good way. I've seen them shop for solutions to fix problems rather than just sort of buying tech because everybody else had it. I've seen them do really well sunsetting conflicting tech immediately. So if you're literally buying a new technology to solve because a previous solution is 20 years old, nobody uses it anymore, all the information's there, so you kind of have to use it. But you want something new, maybe that's in the cloud, you can access it anywhere, right? It's on your phone. That third bullet point under small firms, innovation has to do with saying no to things that you already use. Disconnect people from one app, make everybody go to the new app. That's a form of integration. That's sort of displacing, right? Thinking back to the definition that we used. Also, I've seen small firms elevate priorities, right? In-time billing, that's a priority, right? Because you want a constant, as a manager of a firm, you want a constant sense of what are your billables every day of the month, right? You want in-time billing over preferences, right? A preference might be, well, one partner likes to have their assistant take the first week of the month looking through all their post-it notes and legal pads to kind of scribble in all the time entries. So that's a preference. But firms that are able to sort of elevate priorities, right, broader business goals over the preferences of a few people, I've seen small firms do that really well and really quickly, and they can. At larger firms, here's some things I've seen. They ask about use cases after buying a technology or a tool, right? Maybe they have a lot of tools and technologies. Maybe the advice for whether to get a tool came in because of a relationship with a vendor or a partner. But I've seen it happen where we only ask about use cases in a fulsome way after buying a tool. using resources and know-how to build versus buy, right? Sometimes larger firms do have those resources, and I've seen that work really, really well, right? Where they invest in the right teams and they actually start building their own tools and technologies versus buying. So that's fascinating opportunity, I think, for larger firms. But keeping tabs on and tracking multiple options and horizons. Also, larger firms, I've seen them do that more as innovation as distinct innovators, that option from the prior slide. I've seen them have whole departments or even C-level people in charge of that innovation moment. So also things I've seen about the playing field, just a few quick things. Everybody's using the same LLMs. So the fact that we're using a certain LLM really isn't distinctive anymore. I think early on it was like, oh, we're using GPT-4. That's amazing. You're not using it yet. That was distinctive. That wore out probably within the first few months or year. LLMs can't search, right? They don't have the search capabilities. What Google does as a search retrieval mechanism is different than what Google does to then layer an LLM in and answer your questions. So LLMs do need some kind of retrieval layer. We can talk more about that if you're interested. Governance and permission awareness, super important. Confidentiality. There's some negativity. It's just a wrapper. Those apps, they're still doing quite well. So I would dispel that myth a little bit. And using non-legal AI, I think there's still some folks dabbling in that, and I do think there's some ways to do it well, right? Do you have enterprise options for turning off training, or how's your data processed? But again, some of these questions really aren't novel. If you were correctly adopting cloud software for the last few decades, you had been asking some of these questions already. So I have some questions to ask here. I'll leave those up on screen while we head into our discussion. Maybe you can ask those questions. But as I would be looking to buy AI technology, these are the sorts of questions I would ask. So again, I'll leave those there maybe as a seed for our conversation, but just to dispel, the only next slide was our discussion. So yeah, great to be with you today and look forward to chatting with you.
So first of all, excuse me, thank you, Brian. This was really an amazing presentation, and I do want to open it up for questions. A couple of things that really stood out to me was, again, people do get overwhelmed. People, I think there's some resistance. It's scary to use this technology. But as you said, yes, some people can continue doing what they're going to do, but I think eventually this is going to then be the place that firms are moving to, and clients need a little more efficiency here. The other piece that I think you emphasized that was so important was your prompts and putting in good prompts to get the information that you're looking for. And I will also let people know we're going to be doing another webinar for busy lawyers in November, where we're going to teach actually about really good prompts and how to get the information you need. So it's going to be, I think, a little more of a deeper dive there. And, you know, again, these things are so important. We don't want people to be left behind. There's a quick and silly example of what made me say, you know what, I really need to start embracing technology because I have been so resistant myself. And I used to watch a show called Downton Abbey. And there was the lead cook who refused to use this electric mixer. This was so unique to her. She was used to mixing things by hand. And when I watched this, eventually she did try it and made a little bit of a mess because she wasn't quite sure how to use it, which I think is a good analogy to using AI at this point. But I said to myself, I don't want to be that one who is not going to move forward and embrace what can make things easier in our life. So anyway, I wanted to point those things out. We do have some questions, and person asked, for a new AI user, can you recommend training courses to gain basic knowledge?
Yeah, I just put right there in the chat. I think I'm spelling Andrew's name correctly, but Andrew Ung, really great on that. I've used his courses myself. I think they're on Coursera, and I'm pretty sure they're free. I didn't pay anything for them, but really great at just fundamentals, helping to understand what a large language model is, what a prompt does when it's going through, and anything above and below even those questions. So really like Andrew Ung. I also think legal tech vendors can sometimes have really, really good training. For example, I just took and finished the legal engineering certification from Harvey. It only took me, I don't know, an hour. And it was really good content. I think a lot of it for me was confirmation. I don't know about you, but sometimes learning is confirmation. Just hearing something again, it finally helps it settle in a little bit. But really enjoyed the course because I thought it was well organized. And so, yeah, I like that as well. And it's free. Even if you don't have Harvey, you can go to their website. I'm sorry I don't have a link for you, but if you go to the internet, so just say Harvey's Legal Engineering Certification, I'm sure you can find it. Yeah.
Um, I'm just, for those that can't see some of the chat features, I just added the courses that are very good to hear, to learn. So the other question is, we're hearing a lot about agentic AI. Any comments on that and how that plays into moving forward? Is that something that lawyers need to consider?
Yeah, so the difference between, I'm just going to scroll back up to one of the slides here we had when we were looking at kind of what AI is. Remember, we were sort of thinking of these AI tools, they're packaged as applications, but really at the core of them, and this really is oversimplifying, but they have a large language model and they can reach for tools. Agentic AI is kind of a different kind of tool, right? These agent type models are able to plan. They're able to think through your goals and actually reach for the right tool at the right time to do those to accomplish that goal. So I guess I would hesitate to say, should we be using agentic AI? That's probably the same question as, are there benefits to using AI at all? Agents do have the ability, like I said, to kind of go after your goals. So you would work with an agent a little differently. If you had an agent tool, you would give it an outcome, frame the type of work you want, rather than having to give it very clear, step-by-step instructions, which you can still do, right? If you do have a sense of what you want done at each step. But yeah, in general, agents are simply large language model, Gen AI type tools that are able to plan and use tools at the right time. So can that be helpful for lawyers? I absolutely think they can be just as helpful if used correctly. And yeah, yeah.
Okay, excellent. We do have a question. Can you give examples of agent tools and what they can do?
Yeah, so many of these platforms now would have sort of agent type experiences. So one of the ways that we build agents, I'll just speak from my current experience at DeepJudge. We have an agent that's called our chat. And the chat agent is hooked up to DeepJudge. And DeepJudge, just for the 5-second overview, um, if you can start to think of Google as being an index or a map of all the websites on the internet that has it ready to go. So as soon as you say what you want, it within a millisecond can take you to that page. Not because it copied the whole internet, but because it just created a map of where everything was. DeepJudge does that for your stuff. So you can think of everywhere where you store things. You put them in OneDrive, you put them in maybe a DMS like NetDocs or an intranet like SharePoint, and you can probably think of a few more places where you store things, maybe a practice management solution like Leap or Clio or Practice Panther. So think of all the places you have stuff. But imagine if they were kind of like websites and you indexed all of them and had a search univar in one app to search everything. That's what DeepJudge tries to do. So our agent has the ability to actually do searches and go out and conduct the sort of a real retrieval based search. It's not just sort of reading each document individually to sort of understand what it is and filling up its context. It's actually running a search. And then what's relevant to your search, it can process and analyze. Um, so that's an example of, if I tell my chat agent in DeepJudge, maybe the example I said before, I need to find motions to dismiss that referenced fair use in the Southern District of New York for the last 10 years. It knows how to go out and set metadata for that. Maybe if I have a jurisdiction filter, Southern District of New York. If I have a date filter, it sets it for the last 10 years. That's a much better thing to use as a metadata filter than it is to put in the query box of my search. And all of us are used to to writing queries and setting filters, and we know the distinction between them because it's the same thing as going to your favorite retail store and saying the thing you want to buy, maybe like t-shirt, and then you choose what kind of t-shirt, you want long sleeve or short sleeve. Do you want a certain size? Do you want a certain color? Those are all filters you choose. And yeah, so we do that same thing all the time. But that agent in DeepJudge knows how to make those decisions. My understanding is CoCounsel, Harvey, Begora, all the sort of public AI, they all have the ability to have these sort of agentic experiences. The other ways that you can sort of prefabricate or make your own agents, they'll typically use language like skills or workflows. And that's where you can create what I would call different versions of a railed experience, where you say, not just here, chat agent, go out and use all these tools however you see fit based on my instructions, but a workflow or a skill will say, every time I start this skill, I want you to first do this. Then based on that outputs from that step, I want you to do these three things. Then based on the output from those three things, I want you to do two things for each of those three things. And you can sort of get an idea. If you program exactly what it's supposed to do, you cut down on the idea of it just randomly following your instructions maybe a little bit differently each time. And you create, again, the experience most engineers would call giving it rails. So workflows and skills, just they simply guide your agent with a little more programming around them. But that's really all it is. Some of them are designed to be used by technical folks. Like, for example, I wouldn't design workflows in some apps because I just don't have the technical experience to do so. Whereas others, they literally create a workflow builder for you. So you can prompt the workflow builder to build you a workflow that then has the ability to follow some of those rails. Yeah, hopefully that helps. That's sort of my quick 35,000 foot flyby.
And so that just reminded me, talk about efficiencies. Luz Carrion, our senior law practice advisor, as part of LCL, will be doing a webinar for busy lawyers next Tuesday. And it's entitled, Is Your Technology Helping You? A Practical Checkup for Busy Lawyers. So again, I think she'll go into a little more detail about how to go through your specific workflows and using AI to help you improve those and identify those. We do have, in response to what you had just said, Ryan, I've heard about mediators or lawyers using Perplexity. Can you describe what it can do for legal professionals?
Yeah, great question. I'll give some personal bias here. Just want you to know ahead of time. Perplexity was something I learned about in 2022, and I really, really liked it early on. So I do have a personal kind of affection for Perplexity. The thing that really reached out to me when I first saw them is they build themselves as I think, and I think it was almost prophetic how we all see the internet today. They build themselves as an answer engine. And I really liked that. Think of that pivot from being a search engine where you just find piles of stuff that you have to go through to finding an actual answer. And I think that's just so elegant, the way they sort of pivoted how we were going to. And I think we all experience these tools that way today, right? I don't go to Google looking for search results anymore. I go looking for answers. And so I really just liked Perplexity. I think sort of saw that. And I think their marketing even was just really brilliant in that way. They recently came out with some legal focus. And again, full disclosure, DeepJudge is part of that routine. We are part of their sort of legal batch of things it can do. The thing I really appreciate about Perplexity is it is search first. It does want to go out to the internet. It does want to look through sources, whether it's your sources, your internal things, the public internet worth of information. It wants to find its answers and ground it in actual data. And I think Google has actually started to look like this too. For example, if you ask Google something and it writes out that little paragraph at the top instead of the search results, in that paragraph, you'll see sources that you can click on to go to those pages and see exactly where it got that information. Early instances of Google's answers, they didn't do that as well. But I think Perplexity sort of had that from the beginning. And really, I think they had something neat to offer there. So I love that focus. The specific question I'm seeing is about mediators and lawyers using Perplexity, sort of describing what they can do. Because Perplexity has the ability to look at the internet and come up with citable answers, I really like that for fact patterns. I really like that for thinking through, as your firm may even do. Lots of law firms put a lot of great legal content in their blogs. They're not practicing law. They're simply describing how the law works in a certain scenario. They're describing a new holding, a new case, a new statute, regulation, code. But in that, there's a lot of actually good information, good context that these public tools can use. So just for generic level searching, I think it's really good. But Perplexity also has the ability to connect to your stuff. I'm not clear about all its connectors, but I think some of the DMSs for legal are in there. DeepJudge is in there. So as soon as you start getting into that layer, that gets fascinating. So now you can connect Perplexity to all your past mediations, and can it use maybe how a mediation went? At this stage of the mediation, what worked, what didn't work, and you can sort of get a nice map of maybe some strategy for what's next. Or maybe you're at the beginning of a mediation, the parties just reached out to you, and you're looking for some of that early mediation analysis where you're just scoping it out, trying to get a sense of how it might go. Being able to reach for those places where Perplexity can actually use your information, I think that's a really interesting possibility. Again, not just for mediators, but I think for a lot of law. A lot of times when we start a new case in law, I'm open to correction and other thinking here, but I think a lot of times we're saying, wait, have I done this before? And why did I do it this way before? Or why didn't I do it this way before? And that's the fundamental question that helps us not waste our time, right? And do things from scratch in this instance when we maybe did it for maybe half a dozen clients in the last year the same way. So love the idea of combining search and AI for those reasons. And I think Perplexity can be a really interesting player there.
Excellent. And we have, I think, a similar question. Are the system prompts and RAG, visible to the user for most products? I don't understand that question. I'm hoping you do, Brian.
Yeah, so a system prompt, a large language model has the ability to work with language, but it kind of needs, even just to scroll back up here to our app our app picture. In order for the purple to work, you need a system prompt telling it what this gray thing should do every time it receives inputs. So if the input sounds like it wants an image, then the system prompt says, please use the image generation tool. So a system prompt just helps the large language model do its work. And that system prompt is, again, it sits on the back end. You usually don't see it. It's a great question. I actually don't have definitive information for you on that. I think some providers do. I think even Claude, please feel free to correct me on your own time with the internet, but I think Claude actually, they publish their system prompts or changes to their system prompt, and Claude is created by Anthropic. I think they're pretty transparent about that. I was trying to find the system prompt specifics for other tools, and I wasn't able to find it as clearly. That doesn't mean it's not there. Maybe I just didn't find it. In DeepJudge, again, sorry, this is just what I know best, but it's a good question to maybe ask. I had that on my slide of questions to ask because different tools might do different things. In DeepJudge, our workflows, for example, there you can see when it's working. You don't just get a description, it is now reading your files. You can actually expand that and see the exact system prompt that we put in to have it read your files. So if you choose, you might say, as the overseeing person, overseeing assistants, this time it's AI assistants and not human assistants. But if you're saying to yourself, I'd kind of like my workflow that does this thing to behave a little differently. I want it to actually ask these questions instead of those questions. In DeepJudge, that's fully transparent. You can hit duplicate on that workflow and you can make that tweak yourself live. So I do think that's an ideal state for those who want to be the sort of weekend warriors and kind of control their technology. Some, that's how they'll oversee their tech. For others, maybe they'll have a technician they work with, either a contractor or in-house at their firm, or maybe even a vendor, right? Like DeepJudge, we have some workflow engineers. So it doesn't matter how you do it, but that idea that you might want to tweak the system prompt, not a bad impulse. And I actually really like that, where that question's coming from, because I think increasingly the roadblocks or the barriers to us just building our own tools are becoming less and less. So we will start to expect more transparency. And I think that's one way that I really appreciate DeepJudge. It's actually one of the reasons I wanted to work at DeepJudge, because I saw how they approach that specific area.
Excellent. Thank you. So a couple of things I want to remind people: don't put anything confidential into AI as your prompt. Make sure you, again, maybe keep it a little bit more generic or leave out names. And yes, we're going to make all the slides available to you, as well as you're going to get a recording of this webinar immediately after. So that's answering somebody's question. And thank you all for joining us. We are right at 1 o'clock. Ryan, this was truly wonderful. We really appreciate your time. And I think that hopefully this is going to encourage people and to use AI, embrace it a little bit more. Again, it is scary, but again, I think that's human nature initially to resist, but moving forward, just like the electric mixer. All right. Thank you so much. And we really appreciate you being here. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Have a great
Bye-bye.
day.